Jesus noticed a spiritual sign in those with ringing ears. Why, ringing ears may be a spiritual signal. You have felt it before, that sudden ringing in your ears. But what if that sound was never random? What if Jesus noticed something about people who experience it, not as a problem, but as a sin? And what if understanding it could change the way you see yourself? In the time when Jesus walked the earth, awareness was not directed outward as it is today, but inward, toward the silent movements of the soul. People were not taught to escape their sensations, but to observe them with depth and presence. Among these subtle experiences, there were moments when certain individuals would pause, their attention suddenly drawn inward by a sound that had no visible source. It was not loud, not violent, but precise, almost as if it was calling them to listen in a different way. While others dismissed such moments as distraction, Jesus paid attention to them. He understood that what appears small often carries hidden meaning. In the Aramaic language he spoke, the word kala held a deeper significance than simply sound. It referred to a living vibration, a voice that could emerge not from the outside world, but from within the being itself. This was not something that could be measured or explained through ordinary perception. It was something that had to be experienced. When the ringing appeared, it was not the sound itself that mattered, but the shift it created. The person would momentarily disconnect from the noise of the world and enter a state of heightened awareness. Their thoughts would slow, their attention would sharpen, and something within them would become still. Jesus observed that this state was not common. It did not happen to everyone in the same way. And this is where the mystery begins, because those who experienced this inner sound were often the same individuals who later showed signs of deeper perception, clarity, and inner transformation. The sound was not the destination. It was the doorway. As Jesus continued to observe these individuals, he began to recognize a pattern that others could not see. The ringing was not constant, and it did not follow a predictable rhythm. It appeared in moments of transition when a person was shifting from distraction into awareness, from external focus into internal presence. These were not random occurrences. They were openings. To understand this more deeply, we must look at another Aramaic word, ruha. This word is often translated as spirit, but its meaning is far more expansive. It refers to the living breath within, the invisible force that animates the human being and connects it to the divine source. When the inner sound arises, it often coincides with a subtle activation of this inner breath. The person becomes more present, more aware, even if only for a brief moment. Jesus did not interpret this as something to fear. He saw it as a sign that the individual was becoming receptive, not chosen in a hierarchical sense, but aligned in a way that allowed deeper perception to emerge. The ringing was not a message to decode intellectually. It was an invitation to become still and aware of what was happening within. And yet, most people miss this completely. They either ignore the moment or try to suppress it. What Jesus demonstrated was different. He showed that these subtle signals could be used as gateways, not by forcing meaning onto them, but by entering the state they create. Because in that state, something begins to open. As these experiences continued, Jesus did not rush to explain them with rigid definitions. Instead, he guided attention toward the state that followed the sound, because he understood that truth is not received through force, but through awareness. The ringing itself was never the center. It was what happened immediately after it that revealed its deeper purpose. Those who noticed it carefully often described a brief moment where everything seemed to slow down. Thoughts lost their urgency. Emotions softened, and a quiet presence emerged beneath the surface of the mind. To enter this state consciously, Jesus pointed toward a deeper form of listening, expressed in the Aramaic word shama. This word goes beyond hearing with the ears. It means to listen with the whole being, to perceive, to understand, and to respond internally. It is an active awareness, not passive reception. When the ringing appears, the natural reaction is often to resist it or question it. But through Shema, the response changes. The individual does not chase the sound or push it away. They become present to it, allowing it to pass while remaining anchored in the awareness it awakens. This is where the shift begins to deepen. Instead of being a random interruption, the moment becomes a point of entry, a doorway into a more refined state of perception. Over time, those who engage with this awareness begin to notice patterns within themselves. They become less reactive to external noise and more connected to their inner stillness. The sound becomes less important than the state it reveals. And this is precisely what Jesus observed. Not everyone heard the sound, but those who did, and who learned to remain present within it, began to access a level of clarity that others could not easily reach. The ringing was never the answer. It was the invitation to listen differently, to perceive beyond the surface, and to enter a space where transformation could begin from within. As this awareness stabilizes, something subtle but powerful begins to unfold within the individual. The moments that once felt brief and accidental start to carry a sense of familiarity. The person no longer reacts with confusion when the ringing appears. Instead, they recognize it as an entry point into a deeper state of presence. Jesus observed that those who embraced this process began to develop a form of inner clarity that did not depend on external conditions. They were less disturbed by the noise of the world, because they had discovered a quieter space within themselves. This is where the Aramaic word nura becomes essential. Commonly translated as light, its deeper meaning refers to illumination that arises from within consciousness itself. It is not something seen with the eyes, but something experienced as clarity, insight, and inner alignment. When the individual responds to the ringing through presence and awareness, rather than resistance, this inner light begins to emerge. It is not dramatic or overwhelming. It is subtle, steady, and transformative over time. However, Jesus also understood that without guidance, many would misinterpret these experiences. Some would become attached to the sensation itself, seeking to repeat it or intensify it. Others would fear it and attempt to suppress it. Both reactions lead away from the deeper purpose. The sound is not something to control. It is something to pass through. The true work happens in the state that follows. To stabilize this process, a simple protocol begins to take form. When the ringing appears, the individual pauses. They do not react immediately. They allow the breath to slow naturally, bringing attention inward without force. In this stillness, they engage Shema, listening not to the sound, but to the silence behind it. As the sound fades, they remain present for a few moments longer, allowing the awareness to settle. Over time, this practice reduces the intensity of the experience, not by suppression, but by integration. And through this integration, something deeper becomes accessible. Not as a concept, but as a lived experience, a quiet alignment that begins to reshape the way the individual perceives themselves and the world around them. If this teaching is stirring something in your heart and you wish to explore it further, we prepared Dois Guides that explains the first sacred words where the journey begins, their layers of meaning, and the transformation they carry. The link is pinned in the comments. 5. As this inner process deepens, Jesus began to recognize something that went beyond simple awareness. Those who remained present during these moments were not only becoming calmer or more centered, they were gradually entering into alignment with a deeper source of being. This alignment was not created by effort, nor by belief. It emerged naturally when resistance dissolved and awareness stabilized. The ringing in the ears, which once felt like an isolated sensation, now became part of a larger pattern of inner activation. To understand this fully, we must return to the integration of the Aramaic words already revealed. Kala represents the inner sound, the vibration that initiates the shift. Ruha reflects the living breath and spirit that becomes active in that moment. Shama is the conscious listening that allows the individual to remain present within the experience. And Nura is the illumination that arises when these elements are harmonized. Together, they form a pathway, not a theory, a process that unfolds through direct experience. At T's stage, something subtle begins to happen within the nervous system. The body, which once reacted to the ringing with tension or confusion, starts to respond differently. The intensity of the sound may still appear, but the internal resistance decreases. As a result, the experience becomes less intrusive. It no longer dominates attention. Instead, it opens a brief window into a state of stillness that can now be accessed more easily, even without the sound. This is where a deeper layer becomes accessible, what ancient traditions referred to as the unified source of consciousness. While Jesus did not use modern terminology, his observations point toward this state of unity. When the inner sound is met with presence, the separation between observer and experience begins to dissolve. The person is no longer reacting to something happening to them. They are simply aware. As this awareness stabilizes, the frequency and intensity of the ringing often begin to change, not because it is being forced to stop, but because the system is no longer resisting it. Integration replaces reaction, and in that integration, the experience becomes less necessary as a signal. The sound was never the destination. It was the activation, and once the awareness it revealed becomes stable, the need for the signal begins to fade. In the final stage of this understanding, Jesus pointed not toward the phenomenon itself, but toward the state of unity that could be accessed through it. The ringing in the ears, the inner sound of Kala, was only the beginning of a much deeper process. What truly mattered was the alignment that followed, the moment when the individual moved beyond reaction and entered a state of presence so complete that separation dissolved. This is where the concept often described as the monad becomes relevant, not as a theory, but as an experience. It refers to the unified source, the undivided awareness that exists beneath all mental activity and sensory perception. Jesus did not present this as something distant or unreachable. He observed that certain individuals were already touching this state in brief moments, often without realizing it. The ringing was simply one of the gateways. To access this state more consciously, a refined protocol emerges from everything that has been revealed. When the sound appears, the first step is stillness. No reaction, no interpretation. The breath is allowed to settle naturally, connecting the individual to Ruha, the living current within. Attention is then directed inward through Shama, not focusing on the sound itself, but on the awareness behind it. As the sound fades, the individual remains present, ogling, inorea, the inner illumination, to expand without force. Over time, this process begins to recondition the system. The body learns that the experience is not a threat. The mind learns that it does not need to interpret or control, and the awareness begins to stabilize in a way that is independent of the sound. As this happens, the intensity of the ringing often diminishes naturally, not because it is being suppressed, but because its purpose as a signal is no longer required. What remains is something far more valuable, a direct connection to presence, a clarity that does not depend on external circumstances, and a quiet understanding that what once seemed like a random disturbance was, in fact, an invitation. Visit Divine Light Academy, my site dedicated to bridging ancient spirituality and modern living. There you will find my guides and a deep journey into Aramaic, the living language of the Masters, designed to help you access states of deep resonance, clarity, and personal revelation. The link is pinned in the comments. Get ready. In the next video, I will reveal more sacred Aramaic words that unlock deeper spiritual understanding. Turn on notifications so you don't miss it. Right now, before you close this video, come to the comments and tell us, what did you feel? What shifted? We read every single response. And if this teaching found you today, subscribe to this channel. Every week we go deeper into the ancient frequency codes that were always meant to be yours.